So good evening from an unspecified place in Ukraine. I have the honor to be here today with Timothy Judah. If you could maybe briefly introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. I'm a British journalist. I've been covering Ukraine for quite a long time. I'm on and off, and I'm here on a reporting mission right now for the New York Review of Books.
So just to get you in the picture of what's happening, we've been deployed on a humanitarian mission, and Tim joined us on it. And on the way there, we've hit a series of unfortunate events, to put it mildly. How would you say, our car broke down several times, but that we still overcame. Unfortunately, about 4 kilometers before our final destination, we ran into this local tradition in this time of the year in Ukraine called Rasputisti, which is essentially extreme mud, and one of our cars just got stuck there. We managed to pull it out several times with our other car. However, at one point, the right rear wheel broke off, like everything was going wrong, and it was getting dark, so we didn't manage to hit our final destination. But so we turned around for a bit and found shelter in this abandoned house, which is likely to have been abandoned due to war, and we don't know who lived here. Obviously, there's some people who we'd like to thank later, because if it wasn't to this house, we'd be in serious trouble. But to go on with the interview, or with the talk, let's say, what are you covering right now?
Well, I've been here for almost a month, and because the New York Review does these sort of long reportage pieces, I've got to write a very long reportage piece at the end of this month. So I had envisaged this coming to the border with you and going to a place which would be otherwise inaccessible as part of my piece. I mean, it will still be part of my piece whether we get there or not tomorrow, partly because of these adventures that we've had. You know. But that's what I'm doing, and I've been in Lviv, in Odessa. I went to Kherson, Mykolaiv, and now here.
So what are your first impressions of today, or your general impressions of today?
Well, you know, like as a journalist, you never learn nothing, so you're constantly learning stuff. So that's the first thing. Of course, it's frustrating that we didn't get to our target, but you know, hopefully we'll be able to get there tomorrow. But you know, as I say, you're always learning something, and just by looking out of the window, you're seeing stuff. You know, fields which have been ploughed, and fields where there's stuff rotting which hasn't been harvested, sunflowers we saw today. You know, it all tells you something. And even when we were stuck in that field, suddenly, you know, it was completely dark. You know, along comes a big armored vehicle, Ukrainian army, an infantry fighting vehicle. I mean, you know. I mean, it was fascinating just to be there and think. The question was like, people might be watching, thinking, well, what were you doing driving across this fields?
Right.
I mean, and the answer is apparently because the normal route to the place we were trying to go to along the Russian border are visible from the Russian side of the border. And Ukrainians and Russians are kind of lobbing artillery across the border at each other. And apparently it's dangerous because, you know, you could be a target along that road visible from Russia. That's why we were taking no risks and going along these well-worn, as you said, very muddy tracks straight through the fields, and that's why we got stuck.
And how would I say? When the for me personally, when the armored vehicle approached, you know, I felt like a child all of a sudden. You know, it's to see it wasn't a tank, it was an armored vehicle, but it's massive, the cannon and everything. And even the respect you get from the soldiers, or you know, it's this how would I say, you know, you suddenly realize really quickly that even we were actually asking the soldiers that if there's any other way to go around, and the soldiers were sort of poking fun at us. They're like, well, no, this is the only supplying route. Obviously, we're in war, so it really hit me there, you know, that you're on a road and there's this armored vehicle like launching at you. Did you feel anxious or anything like that?
No, I felt disappointed because I was hoping they were going to tow the broken down car to the village. That's what I was hoping they would just turn around and help us. But apparently they had other things to do. So they gave some advice. They told us, this is the only way to go. But no, I felt disappointed, to tell you the truth. I was really hoping they were going to help us out and tow us.
And how long are you intending to stay in Ukraine for?
Well, I've been here for like almost 3.5 weeks. I mean, my plan was to stay here a month, so I'll stay here more or less a month. I'm finishing this this reportage trip, and this was going to be the sort of last sort of big kind of out in the field bit. I've got one or two kind of sort of formal interviews to do in Kiev, and then that's it. Actually, I've got so much stuff. I only want to do 2 interviews when I get to Kiev, and then that's it. But I mean, I need this sort of colour to sort of bring it home to people. How shall I put it? To explain to readers what it looks like, feels like, smells like. Because I'm writing this long reportage piece, it's not just a sort of kind of daily news. I'm not doing that. I just have to be sort of it has to be different and sort of more in depth and as you can not as you can see, but I mean there are no other journalists here, and so I'm doing stuff that other people are not doing. At least in this pit. I mean, when I had the opportunity to go to Kherson, obviously there were lots of journalists, but I mean, here is an opportunity to go and see and do things and report on something which other people are not doing. I mean, for example, it hit me. The reason why we're going to this village, really hit me when we were in the field, taking with this whole kind of van full of bread and other things, and when we got stuck there, we realized, well, that's why they're really in trouble in this village, because they can't get it. Otherwise, it's you think, well, why can't they get the stuff themselves, or why can't there's just like no simple way to get there, and that's why they're really isolated up there on the Russian border. As I said, the road is dangerous. The only way to get there is through the field, and they're obviously running out of supplies. I mean, I don't think they're going to starve. I think most kind of little villages in Ukraine, most people have got sort of stores of food and stuff, but still there are lots of sort of things which they need, just sort of basic things like bread. And that's what's in the back of the van. I hope it won't be too long before we get there, otherwise all the bread will be stale.
Just to specify, there's no signal or internet connection. We're very lucky to find a house there's actually electricity in, so we managed to put on some heating.
I mean, you say that, but luckily when we arrived, as far as I've understood, it was like there was no electricity until a few hours ago. It had been off for days.
Oh,
so we're really lucky, because I think in this house we've got plugged in an electric heater, which was here. Otherwise we'd be freezing.
And a blackout can obviously happen anytime. They've been happening even in huge cities constantly. It's become an unfortunate routine in Ukraine lately, because that's one of the strategy of the occupant forces, to wear down the willingness to resist and basically torture the local communities with with cold and isolation, as you said. What are some of the findings you've had in the last 3 weeks?
I mean, as I said, I've been coming quite regularly, and I think that what's really interesting is that I was here in 2014-15, and then I came. Well, actually, I came at the beginning of the year. I came in January, and then I say from January till April. So the invasion began on February the 24th. So you have these, in my mind, there's 3 kind of periods to describe. So there's that period of the time of the revolution, 2014-15, and the beginning of the invasion, when the Russians took Crimea and they took the first chunks of Luhansk and Donetsk, in which period Ukraine and Ukrainians were sort of chaotic, disorganized. It was coming out of a revolution, and the army especially was in a very bad shape, which is why kind of volunteer brigades were sort of formed and and it helped stop Russians in 2015. But still, Ukraine was very weak. And what struck me when I came in January and in the weeks leading up to the invasion was I realized how I had not realized, but I don't think anybody outside of Ukraine had realized, and I think above all, I don't think Putin and the Russians had realized how incredibly Ukraine had changed between 2014-15 and 2008. It was kind of organised, much more united, and prepared. However, I must say that on the eve of the invasion, very few people believed it was going to happen. I mean, like...
Were you here, actually?
I was here, yes, I was here. I came on January, I came in at the end of January, and then I did a big piece, literally, which I filed just before the invasion started, sort of like hours before. And, you know, wherever I went, including Kharkiv, where we started today, I mean, it was complete denial. I mean, people said, of course there's not going to be an invasion, like, what rubbish. I mean, I remember there was a aggressive woman in Kharkiv market, and she said, she shouted at me going, "Have you got a brother?" And I said, "Well, yes." She said, "Would your brother attack you?" And I said, "Well, no." She said, "No, so of course he wouldn't. So of course Russia's not going to attack us." I think that was very, very common. And then that was in the sort of ordinary market. Then there's the sort of more fancy upmarket, covered market with sort of fancy food shops, and called the Sumska market. And I went in there and I had help with that. I was with a translator, and we started going from, you know, place to place, asking people, do you think there's an invasion about to come? I mean, you know, this was this was about February the 18th, 19th. So it was like, we're talking like less than a week before the invasion. And everyone goes, "Nah, of course not, it's not, no. And then I just said to my translator, let's give up now, because everyone was saying exactly the same thing. So, I mean, there was this denial, but still, behind it all, there had been, I mean, Ukraine had really changed a lot. And then I think, then on February the 24th, I was in Kiev, and then I covered all that period, the beginning of the invasion, and then I was covering Bucha and Irpin, and you know, all of that period. And what was interesting was that there was this kind of the morale was extremely high, but there was a kind of euphoria. And now, you're asking like what's changed. I think what's interesting is that what's changed from that period is that morale is still very high, and so it should be. Like 50% of the territory which had been taken off in the first weeks of the war has been taken back, and the West has been incredibly, unsurprisingly united. So morale is still very high, but what a lot of people have said to me is how the one thing that has changed behind this high morale is this: it's personal, meaning that so many people have lost somebody that they know. They've lost colleagues, or if they're soldiers, they've lost comrades in arms. But so now it's not just a sort of defending Ukraine and doing the right thing. It's that plus the personal thing of, you know, I don't want to say revenge. That's not the right word, but it's just that. I mean, well, they put it on as well themselves. It's personal.
Yes. So you spoke on, or you talked about mental resiliency of the nation, and actually, me and my colleagues from Team for Ukraine and Maidan Monitoring Information Center, we're here to monitor war crimes.
Yes.
What are your, how to state it? Not opinions or feelings, or actually yes, opinions and feelings about the atrocities and the horrible behavior of the Russian army or the occupant forces that are here, and
I mean, I've covered other wars before, and
is it comparable?
I mean, in general terms, there are superficial comparisons, and then you sort of dig deep. I mean, no. But I mean, for example, I covered all the Balkan wars. So in Bosnia and in Croatia, you know, there were a lot of obviously war crimes were prominent. But a lot of what's happened, a lot of what strikes me, a lot of what's happened here strikes me as it's self-defeating anyway. It's completely self-defeating, because all it's done is it's kind of united kind of Ukrainian resolve. But I mean, I actually, having been talking to your colleague Petr Poiman, where he has this theory of the sort of how
deviant nature.
What I want to say was the absorption into the sort of military and state mainstream of literally criminal elements.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a commander-in-chief who spent time in the army. You've got the head of the sort of Wagner group who was also a kind of former criminal. I mean, and bringing it and recruiting many criminals to fight, who have little moral scruple, but also little kind of military training either. So I think there is that element as well, which does explain the sort of irrational and to us kind of irrational and sort of uncontrolled kind of violence. And what's interesting is it's not everywhere, because you do go to some places and then not much happened. But then you had in places like in Bucha especially this kind of, I mean, irrational,
incomprehensible aggression.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not because it's like some of it was kind of how should I put it? I think some of it grew out of a kind of paranoia. I think a lot of it grew out, especially in those early days, grew out of the Russians were absolutely paranoid because of people using their phones, reporting positions. I mean, but fine, but you don't have to then go and murder people because of that. But I think that's partly what they were doing, was that they were seizing people and grabbing their phones and murdering them as a sort of way of, discouraging others from reporting positions. But I mean, that's a war crime is a war crime is a war crime. But in the end, a lot of war crimes are irrational and how shall I put it? They don't serve. They serve to only bolster the enemy, and that's what they've done in Ukraine, instead of bolster resolve. I think.
So essentially, if I understand it correctly, it's a both combination of the momentary paranoia or frustration and a reflection of the nature of kleptocratic or criminal regime that the Kremlin runs.
Oh yes, and an army which is sort of hasn't been trained for this. I mean, a lot of these people, mobilized people, have no military training, and perhaps some of the Russian army has poor military training. But in principle, so soldiers are supposed to be educated about what is a war crime and what's not a war crime, etc. I mean, all war crimes happen in all wars. But I mean, a lot of what we've seen is kind of irrational and kind of widespread.
Since you've covered more wars, out of experience, at what point of the war do we find ourselves now, or what can we expect in the near future? That's a
crystal ball question. I mean, one thing about this war has been so many predictions have been just completely wrong. So I'm just not going to say this is going to last for 2 months, or this is going to last for a year or 5 years. I have no idea. I mean, look, on February 24th, people who did predict a war correctly, and the intelligence told us there was going to be a war. I mean, a lot of people didn't want to believe it, but the people said, a lot of, experts were saying this is going to last 3 days, that Ukraine's going to collapse, and of course it didn't. And then a lot of experts keep making predictions and analyses, which proved to be wrong. I mean, the chief of the General Staff, U.S. General Staff, Mark Milley, was saying in the days before Kherson fell, this could take weeks. Even if the Russians are going to leave, it could take them weeks to sort of withdraw. I mean, if the chief of the U.S. chief of General Staff doesn't know, then I don't know. And there are so many unpredictable elements as well.
But at the same time, we do see the Russian regime going into isolation, being constantly sanctioned by the rest of the world, and basically
it's not sanctioned by the whole.
outcasted.
Yeah, but that's because you're looking at it from a European perspective. You're looking at it if you're sitting in China, or if you're sitting in India, or if you're sitting in Africa or other large parts of the world. It doesn't look like that, and that's what the Russians keep saying. Well, it's not the whole world is kind of is against us. I mean, the Chinese and the Indians might be a bit uncomfortable, but they haven't put sanctions. They could do a lot, but they haven't done it, have they?
That's true. So
it's not. So it's not the isolation, complete isolation. I mean, it's isolation from an important economic, sort of.
But is there a way back for Russia at all? Into state pre-war.
Well, not with Vladimir Putin as president, for sure. And not with Vladimir Putin, and not occupying large parts of Ukraine for sure. No. But I mean, who knows? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. And, I mean, a lot of Ukrainians, interestingly, people don't talk about this so much in Britain or America, as far as I know. But a lot of Ukrainians think actually the end of the war isn't going to be decided here as much as in Russia itself. In the sense, people here have a historical vision, thinking, well, you had the First World War provoked a revolution in Russia, and that's what changed things here. And then what led to independent Ukraine was collapse of the Soviet Union. It was also something external to what was happening here. Well, that's wrong. It's not quite what I want to say. It's like there are many people I think that the final end is going to be like a third unexpected thing, like the Russian Revolution, like the collapse of the Soviet Union. It will be something provoked by this war, but unpredicted, and will lead to change in Moscow. But I mean, I don't know, but that's what many people have said to me already.
Maybe last question to conclude the interview. As a British journalist, could you maybe give us some input how you feel the general British public views this conflict and Russian aggression?
I think pretty solidly pro-Ukrainian. I think very much so. I mean, the one thing that I think it needs to be said, from a journalistic point of view, from no other point of view, is that because some people ask me, well, what's different from all other wars you've covered? And there is one thing which is different in this war, is that we as Western journalists, we can't cover the other side, which is a problem. I'm not saying there's nothing to do with supporting one side or the other. It's just that normally in a conflict, it's important to cover both sides, so we know what people are thinking. We know what's happening on the other side, and we don't know what's happening because we're not allowed to get there. The Russians won't give us visas. You can't go accreditation whatsoever. That's why there's no coverage from the other side. So everything is from this side. And there's nothing wrong with reporting from this side, but it would be useful journalistically and otherwise in order to do a report from the other side. But that's physically not possible. No, and that's the big difference between this war and other wars. I mean, for example, during the Bosnian War, you could be covered one side in the morning, and you could cover the other side in the afternoon. You could have a story saying, I mean, literally covering the same place on both sides and make a kind of complete picture. But you can't do that here.
But what does that say actually about the Russian regime? Because it doesn't allow it to do it. It has this control on narrative, and it stems out of the hybrid warfare and information control they've been doing prior to in the build-up to up until
I think that part of it is, well, I mean, I suppose if one says they don't care, maybe perhaps that's part of it. But some of it is I mean, look, a lot of this stuff, what they're doing is not logical, and you can't logically explain it because you've got to be in their heads to understand it. But I think that when I say that a lot of it is not logical, we can assume that life is not great on the other side, and that people are being killed, and perhaps presumably some civilians are being killed on the other side as well. And I don't know, but it would be good to report that. That's what they keep saying. If you read their media or their or the people that how should I put it? People, the sort of activists, etc., who purport, the few activists, Western activists who purport to be journalists who are not really journalists on the other side, they keep saying Ukraine's doing all these terrible things, etc. Well, it may or may not be doing it, but we don't know because we can't report it. So, but it would be logical if it was true that they would let us report it. Well, maybe it's not true. Maybe that's not why they don't let us go. I mean, but I don't know because I can't go there. We can't go there.
Well, thank you, Tim, for the interview. For the moment.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for bringing me on this trip. It's been really fascinating.
It's been an incredible honor and pleasure both to meet you and to have the interview with you. So
thank you very much. Well, thanks for bringing me along.
Thank you. Okay. How long is it? Thanks.